Hi folks, welcome to My Life with Robert Burns. Douglas McKenzie and Jim Thompson here again. We bit of a change this time. Rather than me introduce the guest, we've got a former interviewee, a guy that did 2 episodes for us, Cammy Goodall, who's going to introduce our guest for today.
How are we doing? Good to see you all, and good to be back with you all. And hello to you, Douglas. Hello to you, Jim. How are you doing?
Great. We're doing fine. We're doing fine. Rotten weather here on the west coast. But...
Well, the last interview that we did, I remarked that I was doing it from my good friend Bill Hill's house. So we thought we'd let Bill have a chance to get a wee bit of a chat, because he's got a fairly interesting story. I tell you, I'm actually in the middle of trying to write a book on Bill's life story, so I know quite how interesting his life is. I've had it at great length, but I'd like to introduce you to the inimitable Bill Hill.
Hi there, how are you doing?
Hi Bill, how are you getting on? Well, it just leaves for me to say, Bill, can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Okay, I am 79 years old. 80 on my next birthday in September. I was born and brought up in Hawick in the year 1941. I was born, the year of Pearl Harbor, and I left Hawick after a very interesting childhood, where I learned about nature and I learned about living in the country and so on, and lived with female relatives for a long time while my dad was serving in the army. He served in both India and Burma during World War II. And I stayed in Hawick and learned all about the countryside, all about rural living, and it's something that I treasured greatly. And I learned, if you like, woodcrafts. You know, not making things out of wood, but just being in the woods and knowing what things were. And I stayed at school. I was not a great scholar at school. At primary school, I was good. Lost interest in secondary school. And it's funny because in latter life, I've been a tour guide. And so I'm interested in history. And I've had a career as a musician. Secondary school in Hawick put me off history and put me off ever playing music. I had a history teacher called Sandy Cameron, who had, I think in common with teachers, a lot of teachers at that time, they weren't all that interested in being around kids. You know, the teaching was a great job if it wasn't for the kids. And so I was a bit of a thorn in their side because I was a restless and mischievous young guy. And I also had, for a little while, I had a music teacher called Brian Bonser, who was just inspiring. He introduced me into Louis Armstrong and all that sort of stuff. And the other teacher that I had was a guy called Sodo Smith. Do, re, mi, fa, so, do, ti, do. And he was boring. He would have teenage boys or adolescent boys singing German leads and things like that. And it was like funeral music. And so I was turned off music, but I picked it up again when I left school. And years afterwards, when I went back to this class reunion, and I was hopeless at maths as well, and I had an awful teacher. Well, I liked him actually, but his name was Bob Elliott, and he was very strict. If you weren't a rugby player, and I was a Hawick man, I didn't play rugby, I didn't like fishing, and I wasn't into women. So, and there was,
at that time,
they used to say there were 7 women to every man. in Hawick, and you wonder why I left Hawick. Well, the truth is somebody got my 7, so I went to Edinburgh to see if I could get one. But anyhow, I left just before my 18th birthday. And that's when my real life, I guess, really began. My past life bore no relationship, although it had an influence on where I am now. In fact, you want to talk about Burns eventually, and I'm not what you would call a Burns scholar or aficionado at all. I love to go to Burns suppers. I love to watch other people play, but the first time I ever went to a Burns supper was with the Hawick and Galashiels Cycling Club. And we cycled. We used to cycle in late January all the way to Tibby-Shields Inn. And we would get there okay through icy roads and all the rest of it. On the way back, it was, there were folk lying in the roads and all the rest of it with the split off the bikes. And that was the first time I was introduced to Burns. And the first time I heard both Tam O'Shanter and Holy Wooly's Prayer. And those are the only 2 things I do out of Burns's work ever at all.
You still have a haggis every now and again as well.
I address the haggis and whatnot, but I was for a number of years. Eventually, when I got to Edinburgh, I joined the Balerna Burns Club, Let It Blow, and the Let It Blow Burns Club. I was for a number of years the club bard. And for every year I was there, I wrote an original piece of verse for the Bard's Oration, and a lot of those verses, well, you'll hear 3 of them tonight.
Very good. But let's go back to that point of finishing secondary school, and so what was the trigger to get you to move on from there?
My dad was a brickie. My dad was a Yorkshireman. He met my mum while he was stationed at Stobbs Camp, just outside of Hawick during World War II. Mm-hmm. A very handsome man.
Don't know what happened to it.
I know, I was going to say. My mother was a very beautiful woman. When they took to a dance floor, everybody stopped and watched them. I think, from what I can gather, the milkman was a right ugly bastard. But anyhow, he stayed in Hawick and so on, and he taught me a lot about the countryside. He was a Yorkshire miner, so he was a staunch labour man all his days. And my grandfather, who was actually of Irish descent and wasn't my mum's real dad at all, she was adopted, but he was a liberal when the borders were all liberal, and he used to say, never trust a Tory, they're all bloody diddlywags. I tried to work out for years and years what diddlywag meant, and it wasn't until years afterwards I was at a class reunion in Hawick High School, and we were getting shown around the school by a technical teacher, and he was asked about what it was like teaching nowadays, because I was class of 1954, and he was saying, well, he said, well, it's no bad, but we get our diddlywags again. I said, what the hell's a diddlywag? It's a stippy bastard. And when I came to Hawick, came up from Hawick to Edinburgh, I had to lose the Hawick accent. Like, you would not believe how quickly. Folk would look at me as if I had horns growing out my head. So divvy and Eri and Eru. My dad was offered work up in Edinburgh where the money was better. and I moved up to Edinburgh with the family just before my 18th birthday. Saying now I'm coming up to my 80th now, so as near an Edinburgh man as you can possibly get. But whenever I'm asked where I come from, I always say Hoyk. I don't say
So what was the first job in Edinburgh?
My first job in Edinburgh, I'd started an apprenticeship as an apprentice engineer, and that's where I was into the asbestos at that time. And I had to finish my apprenticeship or break my apprenticeship, so I couldn't get a job to finish it. And so I went to work in St. Cuthbert's Cooperative Bakery Dispatch for 3 months. Before that, though, I had 3 months unemployed and spent every day exploring Edinburgh. And I fell in love with Edinburgh. My longest love affair is the tune of Edinburgh. I love it. I love the streets of it. I love the history. I love the scenery. Just you name it. That's why when I retired, I became a tour guide. And I went up there. I worked for 3 months in the Bakery Dispatch, then went to work with Ferranti's, where I was a wireman wiring up guidance systems for the TSR-2 fighter bomber, which was scrapped eventually. And by this time I'd started singing with a guitar around my neck in local bars. And that's where my love was. So Ferranti said, I don't know what we would do without you, Bill, but as of Monday, we're going to try. And so I found myself out in my neck, 3 months married. Can you imagine that? And I was very lucky because my father-in-law was a guy called Frank Rushbrook. Frank Rushbrook was the fire master of Edinburgh and Lothian's fire brigade. And he was to fire engineering what Red Adair was to oil engineering, oil fires. And so he was the world expert. And I was petrified to go and tell him that I'd been fired. But he said, your heart is not in what you've been doing. And you've got a lot of potential in you. And I'd like you to follow that potential. And so that's what I did. I became a professional singer. And my wife joined me at that time and so on. And I had a fairly good career, made a couple of albums, made television stuff, toured with people like Jimmy Shand and his band, and met people like David Frost who were popping into the bar I was singing in and stuff like that. So it was an interesting time in my life.
And at what age did you start singing at? What was?
I took up the guitar. I'd always had a touch for music, although I've never been able to read it at all. I was by ear. I was sent when I was 7 to a piano teacher. And after about 2 months, the piano teacher said to my mum, he'll never learn to play the piano because he doesn't read the music. She said, I'll play him the piece and his ear's that good, he'll play it back without looking at the music. They said, he'll probably be a musician, but he's not going to be that kind of musician. And so that's how it happened. So I was always able to draw a tune out of something. In fact, my earliest gig playing a musical instrument was playing the harmonica. And I played like Larry Adler. I played a proper harmonica with a button on the end of it. And I was at the age of 10 and got paid 10 bob for playing in a fundraiser for the Hoyk Harlequins. No, the Hoyk the Hoyk Teviotdale Harriers Club. And it was a guy called Dave Young, who was a trumpeter, who tried to teach me how to play the trumpet. And he said, you're a great musician, Bill, but you're never going to be a trumpeter. He was just an amazing guy. And he was almost like Eddie Calvert. I can't remember if you remember that.
Yeah, I'm old enough to remember that. Yeah.
But Dave played all that sort of stuff. and he died just a couple of years ago.
Aye.
So that was me up in Edinburgh. I was in a boys' club. There was somebody in the boys' club playing guitar, and I'd been introduced to all sorts of performing things like club pantomimes and club spring shows and reviews and so on. And I'd got a taste and discovered a bit of a skill in I suppose, presenting myself to people. And so I picked up the guitar and I really, really practiced hard. After 3 months, I went to the Waverley Bar, which was a great centre for folk singers to go to. Archie Fisher, the early Corries, Robin Williamson, Clive Palmer, Bert Jans, huge names would all go to the Waverley Bar. And Delina McLennan, great Gaelic singer and actress, ex-member of staff of the Chief of the Stag and the Black Oil. And she gave me my job, and I worked there for 4.5 years.
Tremendous.
That's where I started in the music business. And then I went into groups and various odds and ends, made albums, did television, worked with Jimmy Shand, and
So has it always been a kind of folk style of music that you played?
I was interested in blues at the beginning, and I was getting to play the guitar, and of course Bert Jans was a fantastic blues guitarist before he started Pentangle. But I was taught by Archie Fisher, and Bert would show me the odd bit of blues stuff, and I could play a wee bit. I wasn't very good, but I could play it passably well. And so at that time, Chris Barber, the famous jazz band player, was bringing all sorts of American giants of the blues, jazz and blues genre of music over to Britain. And I used to go to the concerts in the Usher Hall, and I saw Big Bill Broomsay, I saw Josh White, I saw Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee, I saw Chris Barber himself playing, and I really got into that. And by this time I was getting quite proficient myself at playing. So I was invited to sing in the band breaks with the jazz bands at the Place, which was a little nightclub which was underneath the George IV Bridge in Edinburgh. And so that was it. And I did that for a while. I made my second album. I was singing with a guy called Tom Smith, who was the younger brother of Bill Smith, who was in the Corrie Trio. Tom and his wife and Archie Sinclair, who was the leader of a prominent jazz band, and his girlfriend were killed in a car smash, and we were almost finished our second album. So Gene and I, with the help of a guy called Dick Gawkin, who's another big name in the folk music scene, and Robin Brock, who is just recently died, just a couple of weeks ago died. He was a bass player, had his own band, and he was a big name in the Scottish dance music scene. And they helped us finish, and we took the finishing vocals on and listened to Tom singing when he was dead, and that was a hard job to do.
Well, we'll get you to move on and tell us a wee bit about what you moved into after you retired, because I think we'll probably come back to talking about some of your own stuff when we start talking about the Burns connection. And especially, I mean, most people that are watching this will know of Bill Hill's Police Record, which, if they haven't heard it, can get it on YouTube. But you talked about moving into tour guiding after you retired. Could you give us a few minutes on how that came about?
Well, I had a 30-year career in local government. I'd gone to school after the boys' club. I wanted to put something back into what I'd got out of it. So I went to Jordan Hill College and studied for a diploma in youth and community service, and went into the youth and community department of Edinburgh Corporation. And I had a long and very successful career in that, but I still managed to keep my singing going. And I eventually took early retirement. I was put under a lot of pressure when local government got to a situation where for every one person who was delivering a service, there were 10 bean counters. You know, Thatcher started it, and then the whole thing, and so, you know, and so I finished up with depression, clinical depression, and I had to take early retirement. Now, I kind of thought, I'd watched people taking early retirement out of local government and putting their feet up and be dead within 3 months. So I thought, I'm not going to do that. I had an interest in folk music, obviously. Through the interest in folk music and my background in the Borders, where the cradle of Scottish history was, I had an interest in history, and I had certain communication skills and entertainment skills. So I thought, tour guiding is the thing I'm going to do. That way I shall keep my brain active, my lungs active, and my legs active. And so I decided I would go and get a job in the open top buses in Edinburgh. And I worked there for about 5.5, maybe 6 years before I realized, why am I doing this for a five or a tour when I could be doing it for myself for a whole lot more. So I stopped, I left it, and I still remember lots of good memories of my time in the open top buses. But I stopped that and I set up my own little business with a bit of help. It took off like topsy. I've got friends all over the world, and even though I live on my own, and through lockdown, I'm never alone, because I'm speaking to folk all over the world that have been clients of mine and so on. And so I set that business up. I realized I really, really loved it. The business grew like topsy. But this time I got to know this character here on my left-hand side. And
that's when it all went pear-shaped, no?
Well, I'm still waiting for the tenner he borrowed off me, but
You'll wait.
No, my ex-wife Jean was a member of a lassie called Debbie, who was in the band of the Royal Regiment of Scotland, and it was Jean that introduced me to a set of musicians from that band, and Cammy was one of them. And Cammy and I, it's fair to say, well, for me anyway, it was like an instant spark. There was an instant rapport between us. And I mean, he's my bestie, and I couldn't ask for a better bestie. He's there for me. I got into trouble in the Far East a few years back. Cammy was there to get me back home again, and so on. So we owe each other a lot. And when Cammy was coming out of the army, and had certain money worries, although he's got a lot of, as you know, he's got a lot of irons in the fire, as our Cammy. Not many of them were money-making irons. So I'd said to him, why don't you train up as a tour guide on the open top buses? So he did, and he lasted there a year. And then I took him in to stand in for me, and eventually he made his own niche. I didn't want to be driving all over the country, because I'd done that in my years as a musician. I wanted to do the walking tours of Edinburgh, where I felt most comfortable. Cammy wanted to make a bit more money, so Cammy became a full partner in the business. and Cammy will inherit the business when I shuffle off my mortal coil, and so that's where it came. And up until this pandemic started, we were really doing well. Cammy in particular, and we have a very similar way of going about things. We believe that that tour guiding is 20% knowledge and 80% show business. And that's what we do. And Cammy will stop and he'll sing to folk and all the rest of it and entertain them in that way, and brings a whole scene, a whole bit into Edinburgh that I can't bring because he's come at it from another angle, from the literary angle. For me, it's been purely the historical angle. So Cammy will give them all the bits about, oh, this is where Burns met so-and-so and folk like that. So it's great. And I specialise in, you know, the saying we've got in Scotland, we're all Jock Tamson's bairns. Well, I try to put that into practice. When I meet somebody, I'll say, where are you from? And they'll say, let's say they'll say in a state in America, let's say Texas. I'll say, well, did you know on the plaque in the Alamo, 36 of the names of the people who died were Scots people or Scots descent? And I always make the connections for them. And Cammy will tell you I can do them instantly.
Very good.
I've got that kind of mind that retains that stuff. And so I do that with them all the time. And so I make friends with them as we go along. And if I get Americans, I'm in my element. Because if you go up the High Street, up the Royal Mile, or let's say down the Royal Mile, at the top of the Royal Mile, there's Semple's Close. And that's where the Semple family live. And one of the Semples on the male side was got married to a lady called Mary Livingston. And Mary Livingston was an ancestor of Robert Livingston, who negotiated the Louisiana Purchase. Most of America off the French. And down the bottom of the Royal Mile, there's Seton House, the home of the Earl of Seton. It's called, what's it called? Wilson House, not Wilson House, where the veterans' residence is.
Whiteford House.
Whiteford House. I will say that was the home of the Earl of Seton. And the Earl of Seton was the man who negotiated, who was the chief negotiator at Jamestown after the surrender of General Cornwallis, and America came into being. So in one street in Edinburgh, you've got most of your early history.
That's tremendous.
And it really gets them in. And I judge how I'm doing by the amount of awesomes and really far out and so on.
Which is a great thing about working with Americans, because they're very free with that kind of language.
Yeah.
Perfect. You need to tease it out of an Australian, but an American just gives it freely, you know.
And if I get doctors, I mean, I can blow them away as well. But there's a story that I always tell with Americans. I'll say there was a, you know, a lot of the Scots were cattlemen because that was where they came from. They came from the Highlands, and they were cattle breeders and cattle stealers. We taught you how to do rustling, you know. And I said, one guy who was a guy called Samuel Wilson, a Scottish cattleman who set up a meat company in Chicago. And his job was to sell sides of beef to the Union Army. And secondly, first of all, the American Army. First of all, the Union Army,
Continental.
after the Continental Army. I said, and he wrapped his beef in cheesecloth, and he stamped on it Sam Wilson's beef. Well, there's two versions of the story. At the beginning, US, okay, United States,
Yeah.
which was stamped on as well. But the American soldiers took that to mean Uncle Sam.
Ah,
That's where the Americans get Uncle Sam from. So I'll say, even Uncle Sam, you know. So it's a great job, and I love doing it. And
yeah,
when clients come with me, they have to be prepared to be interrupted on the way along, you know, because I wear the kilt, and when you wear the kilt, you're a magnet. You really are. You're a magnet for all sorts of people, particularly pretty young Eastern girls.
And Bill never turns down such an opportunity.
And,
well, we'll not talk about the pretty young Eastern girls. There's two Western Scottish guys over here want to now move you on to talking a bit about your music and about Burns. So I'll ask Jim to start talking about some of these subjects, and I'll come back in a bit later.
okay, carry on, Jim.
Well, as you know, huge fan. Have been since 1991 was the first time I heard Both Three Kid getting sung by a guy by the name of Jim Blades. I think you've been copied by everybody in Ayrshire.
And if I had a penny for every time it's been stolen from me, I'd be a very rich man.
Well, I've got to be honest, I've stolen it as well, because I've been repeating it for years as a poem. However, how did you start doing performances at Burns Suppers?
Well, the Balerno Burns Club, which I joined, it was a guy called Jimmy Dunbar, who you maybe come across his name in Burns circles. And he got me involved in it. And it's a very old Burns club, the Letted Blaw Burns Club in Balerno. And I would go along there, and they would always ask you to sing. Now, it was not 100% purist Burns club. In other words, they didn't expect you to limit yourself to Burns when you did a bit of harmony. So I was able to do my own stuff. And so the people loved it. They loved to get a laugh out of it. And we used to have croupiers at the table, and they would call out for the harmonies. And there was one was Jack McCaig, and the other one was Loppy Ramsey. And I got singing one night, and the two croupiers fell out because I was doing non-Burns stuff. And Jack McCaig stuck his head on the other guy. So that was my introduction to the Balerno Burns Club. But it came to the bit that the Balerno Burns Club is unique in lots of ways, because they never have to go out with the club membership for the program. Everything is done within the club membership, and it's done to a very high standard, as Cami would tell you. There's a lot of great Burns performers there, and but they have a bard, and the bard writes his bard's oration every year, and I did it for 14 years in a row, and I've got a couple of them here for you for later on.
Well, never mind later. Just give us one of them right now.
Okay. Well, we're now into March, and I would always try and pick something topical. and I would always try to make it funny. Now, a couple of years ago, I came across this new term that I'd never come across before called Veganuary. And Veganuary is where they encourage people to go vegan. I mean, isn't as if it's no bad enough going to burn suppers without being vegan as well. But I've always been a person who thinks if you were meant to be vegan, you would have teeth like a cow, you know. So I'm not, you know, I am pretty much of a gourmet and a gourmand. So I decided to write a wee poem about it. It's called Veganuary's Here. We'll cronies, here we're gathered to celebrate the bard, but this year will be different and in many ways quite hard. We'll drink the toast to Rabbie and whiskey, wine and beer, but the rest will be quite different, for Veganuary's here. Nae flesh will grace the table as they pass the platters round, for some hippie academics in their wisdom have just found that eating meat's nae good if it's longevity you seek. Did I hear it on the grapevine? No, it was just a leak. The cock-a-leaky's been gelded, at least that's what I hear. So now it will be cockless and tasteless, so I fear. Veggie haggis and mashed tatties in the supermarket's cheap. You'd have to go into Whitehall if you want to find a neep. When you've had the first and second course, the last one when I please, the oatcakes will be fine, but what about the soya cheese? Dessert might just be Cranachan, that's every Scotsman's dream. Whiskey, rasps and meal okay, but no if there's nae cream. And when it comes into the toast, there'll be problems there as well, because the toast to Rabbie will all be shot to hell. Call Rabbi will replace the bard, and that's a bloody drag. And there winna be a piper, for there's leather in his bag. And while we're on the subject then, there's sporrans, kilts and shin, and skiing doos with staghorn, they'll never be let in. Plastic gear is now the answer to celebrate our Rab. So pop into Gold Brothers, they've got the very dab. And when it comes to poetry, well, there it's much the same. For yows won't be cowed to the nows, and the kye will no come hame. And for the good Lord's creatures, we'll have to treat them nice. So nae disrespecting insects or massacring mice. But don't despair, my cronies, for things are no too bad. For despite the PC vegans, good times will still be had. So we'll celebrate Cole Rabbi and feel mighty proud. For thanks to Willie Fisher, Hugh McGandy's still allowed. So lie in, dear cronies, to start the Old Lang Syne, and despite the limitations, the supper will be fine. But here's a note of caution that I will pass to you. Never track a vegan's footsteps when they've been to the loo.
Oh, very good.
So, I mean, obviously you get into writing your own stuff early in terms of...
I didn't actually. I didn't write a song until I was at college.
Oh, that's early enough.
I mean, he didn't go to college until he was near 30, so, you know.
All right, aye, but, well, I mean, Bill, the police record was published first, was it 78 that was published?
1978, yeah.
Right, so you've been at it a while.
I've been at it a while, but I didn't actually start writing songs until my first year at college, and I didn't know I could do it. But we had the course I was doing was a course that was to prepare you to go out in the communities and work with kids, and they might be difficult kids sometimes, so you had to be able to engage them in a lot of different ways. So we were taught things like sports, outdoor pursuits, all sorts of things like that, politics, economics, and all the rest of it. And our modern teachers and modern studies tutor, he, his name was Walter Riddle, and he asked us to do a mock-up of a radio program, like sort of tonight. And it was all, we had a guy from Northern Ireland, and he spoke like that. He was really, really Northern Irish, well now. And he would speak like Ian Paisley. And the flag of my country has been ground down in the ground. And he did his newscast from Belfast. And I was asked to do a song. And I got the song, the idea that there was a bit about, there was an Indian famine going on at the time. And I got this idea for this song from a song that Dean Martin recorded called Little Old Wine Drinker Me. So I wrote a parody to that, and it was Little Old Rice Eater Me. And it was all the Indian cliches, you know, and it went really, really well. And I can't even remember the words of it now because it was a lovely poem, but they really enjoyed it because I was doing. I sent the man down in the bar to ask the man down in the bar to play the sitar. And the music took me back to New Delhi. And ask you who's that fool in the corner, and little old wine drink. Rice eater me, and from there, but I left and I never wrote another song. I was doing the college folk club, and I did write. I wrote a few songs after that. Once I discovered I could do it, I started to turn out songs quite easily, although I wasn't thinking of performing them at that time. So I was drawn in my experience of touring the Highlands with Jimmy Shand and whatnot, and all the things I got, and that's where I got songs like The Scottish Holiday and so on, and taking the piss out of Scottish tourism. And so I would sing them at the college, and eventually we were coming back, my pal and I, my flatmate and I, from a weekend in Edinburgh, and we started talking about cowboys and what would happen if it happened in Scotland. So I was starting to conjure up all these ideas of cowboy cliches in a Scottish context, and I filed them away. I never used them. But eventually, one night I came back from, I can remember it vividly. Whenever I wrote a new song, and when I wrote a new song, I would go out and test it on an audience before I put it into the act. And I used to go to hear a group called the Norfolk in a pub in Rose Street, and I heard them one night singing The Wild Colonial Boy, but they were singing it to the tune of Ghost Riders in the Sky. And I went back home to Balerno and I got out a bottle of homemade wine, and I just sat there, and the words were just coming out quicker than I could write them.
Do you know what's hitting my mind right now? And then I get on Lardy with a salmon off the wall.
And finished off the business with my lucky grouse boots clothes.
Well, but when I was performing, I always did a bit, and this is what Cammy's hoped to do with the book, is I would always, the introduction to the song was always the context in which it was written. So I'd be doing things like, if cowboys had happened in Scotland, what would have happened? You know, got films like High Troon and stuff like that, and Butch Cassidy and the Sword Dance Kid and so on, and paint the scenario for them. And that's how my act became. It wasn't just about the songs, it was about contextualizing them and putting out the. And the problem with me was there were people going on the scene that weren't just nicking the words of the songs, they were nicking the routines that went with them as well.
And did you become, apart from you're doing this semi-professionally and going around the pubs and such like, did you also go around burn suppers at that time as well?
I did the odd burn supper. I wasn't.
When was it you were in the Collington Burns Club as well? Because you were...
Yeah, we reponed. A friend of mine and I reponed the Collington Burns Club. But Derek, Derek is now no longer with us. He died a few years ago. But Derek was a businessman. And we used to have the Burns suppers in Merkerson. Well, we had them in the Collington Bowling Club to begin with. But eventually, we wanted to raise funds. And I happened to know Jean Redpath. So I persuaded Jean to come and sing in a concert in the Merkerson Castle School Assembly Hall, and she did. And the guys in the Burns Club, the Collington Burns Club, were going to do it, and I went to Balerno and I said, why don't we do this as a joint effort? And who was the guy? Gordon. He used to have bookseller at the top of the mound, Gordon.
I don't remember.
Oh, he was a bit of a stuffed shirt, and he'd said, "Well, we don't feel that Bill has got the experience to run this event, but we would like to take it over." And I go back in touch with him and I said, "Listen, I have run bigger events than you've run. Let me tell you. So you just keep it." And we put the thing on ourselves. We made 600 quid out of the night.
Wow. And
so I went back to say, you could have had 300 quid in your hands, but never mind. You've got pride, we've got the money. And that's when Derek wanted to make the Burns supper into something you could sell as corporate entertainment. And that just really stuck in my throat.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't fancy doing a Burns supper with 300 people in front of me in a huge big assembly hall. So that's when I left the Collington Club. And I believe it crashed a bit afterwards.
But what he did do for a good many years, and he'd probably go into this on his own, but he ran quite a lot of McGonigal suppers.
All right.
McGonigal suppers were absolutely fantastic, as you could quite imagine.
Aye.
Have you heard of McGonigal suppers?
Oh, yes.
I was introduced to it by a member of the Corstorphine Round Table. And I was asked to sing at a McGonigal supper. And what was the hotel's name that's down at the roundabout as you go up to the Fourth Bridge? It looks like the Bates Motel.
The Maybury.
Maybury.
No.
No. It's the next one up. It's it's now retirement flats.
Yeah, but it used to be a hotel, and it just looked like the Bates Motel in the corner, and it was a good one. I can't remember what it was called, but never mind.
Was it the Barton Hotel? No,
it might have been. It might have been the Barton Hotel. But anyhow, everything goes back to front. You start off the meal with a pudding, finish off with a soup, and the votes of thanks are all done before the speeches. And they have watering cans filled with beer, and you pass them round and drink out the spout. And whoever finishes the beer, the person who drank before him has to fill up the watering can again. And whenever they say McGonigal, everybody stands up with a dram and says, "William Topaz McGonigal, may his name be remembered for a very, very, very long time." And everybody just gets rat-ass drunk. And the raffle is incredible. Somebody we'll be sitting at a table, everything's set up, and he'll go, yes! And he'll walk up to the table and he'll hand a ticket over to somebody and he gets a bottle of whiskey. And then he goes back to the table and then the guy says, number 37. And we just had such, he's no longer with me now. I used to go out with his niece for a while, and Alec, his name was, I can't remember Alec's second name, but it was great fun.
I think you used to have a collapsing tea bridge, didn't you?
I had a collapsing tea bridge. I gave it away. And we used to do the tea bridge disaster. And I made a collapsing tea bridge. And we have it set up. We do, oh, beautiful bridge of the silvery tea. And whenever they went, the storm did loudly blow, and we'd have a hooer making the noise of the storm. and water pistols for the rain coming down. And, with a little train that we towed across with black thread so you couldn't see the string from it. And Boreas did loudly bray. They would all go hee-haw, hee-haw. And it was just absolute madness. And I did a lot of them. And I used to
Oh dear, oh dear.
I think you've broken, Jim.
Well, I think we're going to run out of time here before we get some more poetry out of you. So I think we need to get back to Balerno Burns Club.
Right. I used to start off with stories, and I would do the beautiful stories of the silvery tea. and I would do, I think I've got one of the addresses to the stories in there, but I won't do that. I'll do the Burns Supper one, which is, you'll have, maybe have heard Cammy do my ode to the Burns Supper, sorry, the Mealy Pudding Supper. You'll have heard it. It's on, I think it's on the...
it's on the police record.
It's on the police supper.
Mealy Pudding.
But this is when I wrote, this is one that I wrote for the Balerno Burns Club. And I embellished it over the years. As January draws to a close and thoughts are turning, I suppose, to haggis, tatties, nips and bros and celebrations, and drinking till we're comatose the bard's creations. It's where our cronies we foregather, oblivious to wind and weather, and strive to get our thoughts together as fou as puggies, and listen to the local blether address the haggis. And when the meal is over, we get down to serious revelry, where reeman swats and barley brie, all reason gone, whilst the immortal memory goes on and on. To toast the lasses here tonight, a local wag they did invite. His jokes are old, his quips are trite, but we're no worried. We heckle him, alas, despite, he'll no be hurried. There's toast replies and erudition, laughs, mere drink, nae inhibition. One-liners, wage exhibition, a cheerful batter, and a really bad rendition of Tam O'Shanter. But while you drink frae nature's chalice and get mere foo and still mere gallus, your wife schemes with perfect malice, the wicked devil. She's lost at bingo at the palace, she'll no be civil. The rafters of the building ring with drunken singers who can't sing. By this time they do anything on rapture born. Ne'er thinking of the heartburn sting I'll have the morn. With all lang syne the evening ends, your homeward way erratic wends. You felt courageous with your friends, but now you're sagging. For one dread thought all now descends to face the dragon. So you'll sneak in, she'll be asleep. The door went fine and sought she creep, as worried as a border sheep towards the stair. Trip out the brush she left to sweep the kitchen flare. Where have you been, you drunken newt? There's cock-a-leaky in your suit, but all your pals and stopping out until you're plastered. I'm minded to give you the boot, you bloody waster. "Oh, you's a bright doll," and they shout. "I've only had a glass of stout, and let me see around and about a couple of whiskies." It's then she gives you a lug of clout, sure drinking's risky. It's to the spare room, then you go. It's 3 stairs up and 2 below. On legs all rubbery and slow, you reach your haven. Breeks, socks and pants off in one go, and she's still raving. You crawl across the flare to bed, whilst cursing at the wife you wed. Your clays around the flare are spread, but you're no grinning, for running round above your head, the ceiling's spinning. 3 times you get up to the loo, the first attempt goes in her shoe. You miss the pan with number 2, 3's no a winner, for in the wardrobe then you spew your haggis dinner. When in the morning you awaken, head fair stooning, stomach quaking, the annual vow then you are making, ne'er to repeat. The wife downstairs, fries, eggs and bacon, revenge is sweet. The day wears on to ease your plight. By 3 o'clock you feel all right. A beer at 5, you're really bright, but she's still crabby. The next burn supper's on the night. Oh, God bless Rabby. Or Rab, when the heaven dost dwell, I'm sure that you amuse yourself by watching mortals down here tell the same old story and going through these nights of hell, all for your glory.
Well done. Ah, Bill, that was terrific. It's unfortunately we're running out of time, but we could listen to your stories all night. It's probably worth us reminding people that they can get access to some of these stories, or at least in musical form, on your police record recordings. The CDs of that still available?
I've got a whole load of them here in the office, so they can get them from
boxes in them here.
Oh, well, there you go. So we'll put a note somewhere on our podcast to let folk know they can do that. And we'll also put a reference into your Edinburgh tours. Is that what it's called?
EdinburghTourGuide.com.
Right. Well, we'll make sure we put the website up for that. That was tremendous. Could have listened to you all afternoon. That was really, really good.
Listen,
So
I'm alone, I could have gone on all afternoon.
So I don't know whether we should actually introduce you as the Bard of Balerno, but it's a great title to have.
When I used to tour with Jimmy Shand, and the lead tenor was Peter Mallon. I don't know if you remember the name. Peter Mallon and I were great pals. And Peter Mallon used to refer to as the Balerno Bull. The Bull of Balerno.
But the working title for the book, which is still a work in progress. It might be a year before it comes out. But what we're planning on doing is having a songbook, a book that's full of Bill's material with a lot of kind of autobiographical sort of detail in there as well. But the working title for it's Chapman Billy.
Well, that's a perfect note to finish on. So just to say, Chapman Billy, thanks very much for telling us about your life and with Robert Burns. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. It was great.
Well, thanks very much. You've made an old man's day here.